Most people who saw Doyle Maddox coming down the road moved over. Not because the law required it. Because something deeper than the law required it. Something written in the part of the brain that is older than language. The part that understands size and speed and the smell of iron and leather, and a man who has decided that caution is someone else's problem. They saw danger. They saw the road giving him the center lane without being asked. They saw a man who had never once in 41 years looked soft. But on a July morning in Meridian, Mississippi, on a stretch of Highway 19 where the heat came off the asphalt in visible waves and the kudzu had swallowed the fence line on both sides, Doyle Maddox saw something that made him brake so hard the Harley shuddered. He pulled over. He got off the bike. And then this man, 6'4", 260 pounds, 17 years with the Devil's Torch MC, and a face that had absorbed enough weather to qualify as geography, sat down on the curb of Highway 19 and wept. Not because he was broken. Because something that had been broken in him for a very long time had just, without warning, started to come back. The summer in Meridian comes the way summer comes in Mississippi, not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, like a door opening onto something that was already there. By 7 in the morning on the last Thursday of July, the temperature was 91 degrees. By 9, it was 97. The highway shimmered. The gas stations ran their air conditioning loud enough to hear from the pumps. The convenience stores kept their doors propped, and the cold air poured out like something trying to escape. The Sunflower Gas and Grill on the south end of Highway 19 had been there since 1978. The sign out front still said Sunflower in original letters, though the L had been replaced twice, and the current one was a slightly different shade of yellow than the rest. The parking lot was cracked in the pattern of something that had been expanding and contracting through too many summers to hold its original shape. But the coffee was hot, and the biscuits came out at 6:30 every morning, and the woman behind the counter, whose name was Louise, had been there since 1994 and knew the name of every regular and most of the strangers who came through more than once. It was the kind of place that remembered people. That was rarer than it should have been. Doyle Maddox pulled into the Sunflower at 9:14 in the morning and parked at the far end of the lot the way he always parked, nose out, back to the wall. Sight lines clear. He was 41 years old. The kind of 41 that looks like it was assembled from harder materials than most. 6'4", broad through the shoulders in the way that comes from 20 years of physical work rather than a gym, with forearms crossed by 2 long scars that he had stopped explaining years ago because the true explanation was more boring than what people imagined. The patches on his vest read Devil's Torch, Meridian Chapter, and beneath the chapter name, Road Captain, which was the role he had held for 6 of his 17 years with the club. When Doyle walked into the Sunflower, the 2 men at the counter near the door shifted their stools without knowing they did it. The college kid by the window looked up from his phone and did not look back down for several seconds. Louise, who had seen Doyle 100 times and knew what he took in his coffee, had his mug filled before he reached the counter. "Morning, Doyle," she said. "Louise," he said. He sat at the far end of the counter, back to the wall. He had been on the road since 6 that morning, riding from the clubhouse in Meridian out toward Lauderdale and back, not for any reason, just for the riding, which was the only thing that reliably quieted a particular noise that lived in the back of his head. He had a chapter meeting at 2 in the afternoon. He had 4 hours. He carried something that he had carried for 3 years without setting it down. His daughter Kayla was 7 years old. She lived with her mother in Jackson, 90 miles west. Doyle had not seen her in 11 months, not for any legal reason, not for any reason he had been given in writing. He had called. The calls went to voicemail. He had sent cards. The birthday card in March with a 20 pressed flat inside. The Easter card. The June card with a motorcycle he had drawn himself, because Kayla had loved motorcycles since she was 4, and he had been proud of that in a way he couldn't name. He did not know if she had received them. He drank his coffee. He looked at the wall. He thought about the chapter meeting and whether he could get the lodge's back bathroom fixed before fall. He thought about not thinking about Kayla. That was when the door opened and the day changed. Before we get to what came through that door, take a second to hit subscribe and drop your state in the comments. I want to know how many states and countries are following this story right now. Drop it below. I read every one. Now, back to Doyle Maddox. Back to that Thursday morning in Meridian. Because what walked into the Sunflower Gas and Grill at 9:21 in the morning was something nobody in that building was prepared for. Her name was Rosie Beaumont Cash. She was 2 years old. 26 months to be precise, though she could not have told you that, and no one in the Sunflower knew it yet. She was wearing a yellow shirt with a duck on the front that was a size too large and pink shorts and one sandal. Just the one. Her left foot was bare, and the sole of it was dirty in the specific way that bare feet get dirty on hot pavement, not from a single step, but from walking a distance. The grime worked into the skin. She came through the prop door at a toddler's speed, which is faster than it looks, and less controlled than a run. That particular urgent forward tilt that a child uses when the legs have not yet fully agreed with the direction the body is trying to go. She had a pacifier in her mouth. She had both fists closed at her sides. Her eyes were moving the way the eyes of a very young child move in a large new space, wide, scanning, looking for the one face that would make the space make sense. She did not find it. She stood in the middle of the Sunflower Gas and Grill on a Thursday morning in July, 2 years old, one sandal, and turned in a slow circle. "Mama?" she said. The pacifier muffled it. It came out soft. It came out the way a word comes out when the person saying it is not yet sure the word will work but is trying it anyway. Louise was the first to move. She came around the counter, crouching to get down to the child's level, her voice going soft the way voices go soft with small children. "Hey, sweetheart. Hey. Where's your mama, baby?" She looked at the door. She looked at the lot. There was a blue Nissan parked sideways across 2 spaces. Engine running, driver's door hanging open. The college kid by the window was already standing. Doyle Maddox had gone very still at the end of the counter. He was looking at the child with an expression that nobody in the building could read, because it was not one of the expressions that people who knew him by sight had ever seen on his face. He looked at the yellow shirt with the duck. He looked at the one sandal and the bare, dirty foot. He looked at her turning in that slow circle, looking for someone who was not there. "Mama?" she said again. The blue Nissan in the lot belonged to a man named Trace Willard. He was 34 years old, and he had come to the Sunflower because it had an ATM and he needed cash before a bank transaction posted that morning. He had left his daughter in the car with the engine running because he was going to be inside 2 minutes. He was inside for 11. Not because of a line at the ATM, because on his way back through the store he had gotten into a disagreement with Louise about an energy drink that he believed he had paid for, and Louise's receipt said he had not. A disagreement that had escalated from mild to heated by the time Doyle walked in, and that was now, with Doyle standing at the counter, at a volume that had cleared the space between Trace Willard and Louise down to nothing. "I paid for that drink," Trace Willard said. He was standing at the register with the receipt in one hand and the energy drink in the other, and he had the confidence of a man who had confused certainty with being right. You're calling me a liar. I'm telling you what the register says, Louise said. Your register's wrong. It's not wrong. Then I want a manager. I am the manager, Louise said. I'm also the owner. And I've owned this store for 30 years and my register has never, Mama. The word was very small. It came from near the door where Rosie Beaumont Cash was still turning, still looking. Her voice had changed slightly from the first time, not louder, not distressed yet, but with a wobble in it that was the beginning of understanding that something was not right. Trace Willard looked at his daughter. He looked at her the way a man looks at an inconvenience he thought he had secured. He looked at the receipt in his hand. He looked back at Louise. "Watch her a second," he said. Not to Louise specifically, not to anyone specifically, to the room, in the way that a man says something to a room when he expects the room to comply. Louise stared at him. The college kid by the window was watching with his mouth slightly open. Doyle Maddox set his coffee mug down. "That your little girl?" he asked. His voice was level, not loud, the kind of level that carries anyway. Trace Willard turned and looked at him fully for the first time. He registered the size. He registered the patches. He registered the scars on the forearms and the face that had stopped being readable to ordinary people sometime in Doyle's early 30s. "Yeah," Trace Willard said. "She's fine." "She's been looking for you for 4 minutes," Doyle said. "I said she's fine." He turned back to the counter. "Now about this receipt. She walked in here alone," Doyle said. "From the parking lot. The car was running. The act was on. She's 2 years old, and she walked in here alone from the parking lot in 97-degree heat," Doyle said. The word alone landed in the room the way certain words land, not loudly, but with weight, the way a stone lands in still water. Trace Willard turned around fully. His posture changed. The shift of a man who had decided he was being challenged and had a set of responses for that. "I don't know who you think you are," he said, "but this is none of your business." Doyle did not answer. He was not looking at Trace Willard anymore. He was looking at Rosie, who had found the counter and was standing next to it with one hand touching the chrome rail at her height, her eyes still scanning, the pacifier moving in a slow rhythm that meant she was working out what to do. She looked up at Doyle. He was the largest thing in the room. He had a face that made grown men cross the street. He was looking at her with an expression that was not any of the expressions he was known for. She studied him for a moment, the way toddlers study things. Completely, without the self-consciousness that comes later, just looking, because looking is how you find out. Then she raised both arms. Up, straight up. The universal. The one gesture that means the same thing in every language a 2-year-old has ever spoken. Pick me up. Doyle Maddox looked at those 2 small arms for a moment. He got off the stool. He crossed the floor of the Sunflower Gas and Grill at the same speed he crossed every floor, deliberate, unhurried, with the particular gravity of a large man who has stopped trying to take up less space than he occupies. He crouched down in front of Rosie Beaumont Cash, and he looked at her at eye level. She looked back at him. Her arms were still up. "Hey," he said. Quiet. The word had no edges on it. "Hi," she said. The pacifier dropped to the floor. She did not look at it. He picked her up. She weighed 26 pounds. She smelled of sunscreen and something sweet, the specific sweetness of a child's hair in summer. She put both arms around his neck immediately, with the total confidence of a small child who has decided that something is safe, and that was it. That was the decision. 32 pounds of trust distributed across his left arm and his shoulder and the side of his chest. He stood up with her. The room was silent. Louise was not moving. The college kid was not moving. Even the refrigerator unit at the back of the store seemed to be holding its breath. "This is done," Doyle said. He was looking at Trace Willard over the top of Rosie's head. "You can settle up with Louise. And then you can take your daughter somewhere she's not going to walk into traffic by herself." "You've got some nerve. I've got your daughter," Doyle said, "which is more than you had 7 minutes ago." The room went quiet again. The particular quiet of a space where something true has been said aloud. Trace Willard's jaw moved once. He looked at the receipt. He looked at Doyle and the child on Doyle's arm. He looked at Louise, who was watching him with an expression that had traveled a considerable distance from neutral. He pulled $4 from his wallet and put them on the counter. He crossed the room and held out his hands for Rosie. Rosie turned her face into Doyle's shoulder. He stood there for a moment. That man, the big one, the scary one, the one whose presence had halved the volume of every room he'd walked into for the better part of 20 years, holding a 2-year-old girl who had pressed her face into his neck and decided she was staying. Trace Willard said her name. She did not move. Doyle looked at Louise. Louise looked at him. Something passed between them that was not a conversation. "Ma'am," he said, "you want to call someone?" "Sheriff's non-emergency line, maybe." Louise reached for the phone. Trace Willard went very still. "You don't need to do that," he said. The confidence in his voice had reached the end of its supply. What was left was thin, stretched, the voice of a man recalculating. "I was in here 2 minutes." 11, Doyle said. He had counted. He had been counting from the moment she walked in. "I'll take her and go." "Louise is making a call," Doyle said. He looked at Rosie. She was looking at the display of chips on the wall with the focused attention of a very small person who has found something interesting to think about. Her left foot, the bare one, the dirty one, was swinging slightly. "We'll wait." From outside, low and then louder, a sound rose on the highway. Doyle's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. A loosening, a settling, the way a man's posture shifts when he hears something he has been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it. Trace Willard heard it too. He looked at the window. "What is that?" he asked. Doyle looked at the door. A quiet smile moved across his face, not wide, not theatrical, just present. The way light is present. "Those are my people," he said. Engines. 43 motorcycles had been behind Doyle on Highway 19 that morning. The full Devil's Torch Meridian chapter plus 11 brothers from Hattiesburg who had come up for the quarterly meeting. Doyle had ridden ahead. He had texted his chapter sergeant, a man named Burl Hayes, at 9:22 from the counter of the Sunflower. Stopped at the Sunflower on 19. "May need a minute." Burl had not responded, because Burl was already in the lot. They came off the highway in a column, tight and unhurried, chrome catching the July sun at the angle that turns chrome into something else entirely. Something that catches the eye the way fire catches the eye. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is alive. 43 bikes finding spaces in the cracked Sunflower lot. Some pulling to the shoulder, some taking the grass strip along the road. The sound of the engines built to a single continuous frequency that made the windows vibrate, and then cut, bike by bike, front to back, until the silence was complete. 43 men and women in Devil's Torch leather, standing in a Mississippi parking lot in the July heat, not moving, not speaking, engines ticking cool. The door of the Sunflower opened. Burl Hayes came in first. He was 56 years old and had been riding with the chapter since before Doyle joined, a man built like a retired linebacker, with a graying beard and eyes that had learned to read a room in the time it took most people to find a chair. He found Doyle at the far end of the store. He found the child on Doyle's arm. He found Trace Willard near the door. He read it all in 4 seconds. He walked to Doyle. He looked at Rosie, who looked back at him with the solemn evaluating attention of a 2-year-old. "Hey there," Burl said. His voice went soft in a way that voices did not often go soft with Burl Hayes. "What's your name?" Rosie considered him. "Rosie," she said. "Hi, Rosie." He looked at Doyle. "She okay?" "She's good," Doyle said. Burl nodded. He turned and looked at Trace Willard the way he looked at things he had made a judgment about. "You her daddy?" Trace Willard said yes in a voice that had lost its original architecture entirely. "Sheriff's coming," Burl said. It was not a question. "Louise called," Doyle said. "Then we'll wait," Burl said. He turned and leaned against the counter with his arms folded and looked at the window the way a man looks at a window when he has decided that the waiting is his to do, and he is fine with that. Behind him, through the glass, 42 more people were standing in the parking lot of the Sunflower Gas and Grill in the July heat, and not going anywhere. Trace Willard looked at the window. He looked at the door. He looked at Burl Hayes' arms folded across his chest and the particular expression on Burl's face. He looked at Doyle and the child who had not moved from his shoulder. He sat down in a chair near the door. He put his face in his hands. He did not try to leave. The sheriff arrived in 9 minutes. The report filed that afternoon by Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office documented the incident at the Sunflower Gas and Grill on Highway 19. The deputy noted the child's condition: barefoot, dirty sole, appropriate temperature given the air conditioning, no signs of injury. He noted the 11-minute gap. He noted that the child had been retrieved from the interior of the establishment by a bystander who had kept her calm and safe until the deputy arrived. He noted the names of the witnesses. Trace Willard was cited for child endangerment and released pending a follow-up with the Department of Child and Family Services, which scheduled a home visit for the following week. The blue Nissan was driven to the county offices by a deputy, while a second car took Rosie's mother, who had been reached by phone, who had not known where Trace had taken her daughter, who arrived at the Sunflower 37 minutes after the call, shaking and not able to stop, to be with her child. Rosie went to her mother's arms without reluctance. She turned once from across the room and looked back at Doyle. "Bye," she said. He raised one hand. "Bye, Rosie," he said. She turned back to her mother. She was done with the business of goodbyes, the way small children are done, fully, immediately, already in the next moment. Doyle stood in the Sunflower for a moment after they went through the door. Louise was putting the coffee on for the brothers who had spread through her store and were now occupying every available surface. Burl was at the counter telling a story that was making someone laugh. The store smelled of coffee and July heat and 43 people's collective presence. Doyle walked outside. He stood in the parking lot for a moment in the sun. He walked to the curb at the edge of the lot, the curb along Highway 19, the one he had passed 1,000 times, and he sat down on it. He put his face in his hands. He was not thinking about Trace Willard. He was not thinking about the deputy or the report or the 43 motorcycles still cooling in the lot behind him. He was thinking about a birthday card with a $20 bill. He was thinking about a drawing of a motorcycle. He was thinking about a little girl in Jackson who was 7 years old and might not know, might not understand yet, that there was a man sending cards to the house on Oleander Street who had her face in his head every morning of his life. He was thinking about the weight of 26 pounds. how exactly that weight had felt on his arm. He was thinking that he was not going to let another 11 months go by. Burl Hayes came out of the sunflower 5 minutes later and found him there. He sat down on the curb beside him without saying anything. He looked at the highway. "You all right?" he said. "I'm going to drive to Jackson after the meeting," Doyle said. Burl nodded. He did not press further. He had known Doyle long enough to know the difference between a man who needed to talk and a man who had already finished and reached the part where he needed to act. Doyle Maddox drove to Jackson that evening. He parked on Oleander Street at 7:45. He sat in the car for a long time. Then he walked to the door of the house and knocked. His daughter answered. She was 7 years old. She was wearing pajamas with stars on them. She looked at him with an expression that was doing several things at once, recognizing him, measuring the distance, deciding something. He crouched down the way he had crouched down in the sunflower, so he was level with her. He had nothing practiced to say. He said the only true thing. "I've been sending you cards," he said. "I don't know if you got them. I drew a motorcycle in one of them because I thought you might like it." She looked at him. "I got them," she said. "Mama put them in my drawer." He nodded. He didn't speak for a moment. "Can I come in?" he said. She looked at him for 3 more seconds. 7 years old, pajamas with stars, doing the math of a thing that had no clean answer. Then she stepped back from the door. He went in. The drawer on Oleander Street held 4 cards. A birthday card with a folded 20, an Easter card, a June card with a drawing on lined notebook paper, a Harley Softail, the proportions slightly off, the chrome suggested rather than rendered, the way a man draws who learned to draw by trying and not by being taught. Kayla Maddox, 7 years old, pajamas with stars, had kept every one. Not because anyone told her to. Because she had understood, in the specific way children understand things before they have the words for them, that the cards were evidence of something she did not yet have a name for, but did not want to lose. She has a name for it now. Some people spend years building walls high enough that even the people who love them can't find a way in. And then a 2-year-old girl in a yellow shirt with a duck on the front raises both arms in a gas station in Mississippi, and the wall comes down in a second. And a man drives 90 miles in the dark to knock on a door he should have knocked on long before. The scariest biker on the road was undone by 26 pounds of trust, and everything he was afraid to do became, in that moment, the only thing left to do. If this story reached you, if you believe that the things we're afraid to do are usually the things we already know how to do, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And has a small moment ever pushed you to do the big thing you'd been putting off? Tell me. I read every one.